I'm deeply grateful to the distinguished and honourable members of the National Assembly for this very kind invitation to speak at this crucial National Security Summit. And I especially commend the distinguished majority leader of the Senate, Senator Ahmed Lawan, who leads the committee on the ad hoc committee on security infrastructure. I also must say very special thanks to the Senate President for giving me the opportunity of declaring this Senate open, this meeting open. Hosting this summit underscores your recognition that the primary business of government is law and order. And of course, by government, I mean the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. I'm sure that the distinguished members will recall that the National Economic Council, comprising the federal and state governments, held a similar security summit in August last year, at which we had the eminent company or the leadership of the National Assembly, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, service chiefs, and several other stakeholders. That summit was an important one because it took into account several of the security challenges that our country has faced over the years and currently still faces. Also, just in September, the month after, the government, after a year-long consultation with several stakeholders, hosted a stakeholders conference on the 10-year plan in search of sustainable livestock development and peaceful coexistence. And that 10-year plan was launched at that conference in September. I'm going to talk a little about some of the issues that were raised at that conference. This very important security summit is an important part of the ongoing engagements with stakeholders on the security concerns of our nation. And I'm extremely pleased and support fully Mr. Senate President where he said that the challenges of our security infrastructure are the concern of all of us, not just those of us in government, but all of us who are concerned about the peace and harmony of our nation. Your Excellency, distinguished members of the National Assembly, Nigeria entered into the new year on a tragic and bloody note. More than 70 persons, 73 is the figure we have, were murdered in Benue State by persons who were suspected to be herdsmen. To the north, in southern Kaduna State, a traditional ruler and his pregnant wife were murdered in their home. Down south in Rivers, a cult murdered more than 20 innocent persons returning from a church vigil. On the 3rd of January, 14 worshippers were killed in a mosque at Gamboru. On the 17th of January, a suicide bombing attack took place in Maiduguri, claiming 10 lives. These incidents immediately serve as a reminder that there is no room for complacency in the task of securing Nigeria. Even against the backdrop of remarkable progress that we've recorded in the most critical of our security challenges at the time, the fight against Boko Haram. Maybe Boko Haram is perhaps a good starting point for a conversation about security in Nigeria as we go on to the more current and contemporary concerns we have. How a small band of religious proselytizers evolved into the biggest threat to the sovereignty of Nigeria in 5 decades is a question that has occupied and perhaps even defied researchers and law enforcement agencies for years. In 2015, when the Buhari administration took office, much of northern eastern Nigeria lay beneath the palpable shadow of the terrorist group. In the 2.5 years since then, our military has done a remarkable job reclaiming Nigerian territory, rescuing tens of thousands of civilians, and routing Boko Haram. Today, the group is a shadow of itself, forced to resort to cowardly suicide bombings and other attacks on soft targets in a desperate bid at attention seeking. Boko Haram was by no means the only security challenge that we inherited when we took office in 2015. Cattle rustling, pronounced especially in the northwest of Nigeria, clashes between farmers and herdsmen in the north-central region in particular, and spreading out to other regions of Nigeria. Militant activity in the south-south and parts of the southwest, simmering ethnic agitation in the southeast, and kidnapping in various parts of the country. There was also the Islamic movement of Nigeria in the northwest, increasingly emboldened to challenge the authority of the state. The scale and breadth of these security challenges, especially because they occurred in far-flung locations in the country, profoundly tasked the nation's security architecture. And I want to say especially that because of the spread and because of the diversity of these threats, the nation's security architecture was stretched, engaging in several different parts of the country. And of course, with the numbers that we have, that in itself posed a problem for tackling as robustly as possible many of the challenges that were faced. But we must say on behalf of the security agencies that they have been deliberate and determined in their responses. For obvious reasons, we have since, assuming office, prioritized the anti-terrorism campaign in the Northeast. Understandably, as Boko Haram has receded in public consciousness, in 2017, the Global Terrorism Index reported that deaths from terrorism dropped 80% in Nigeria, especially in the year 2016, the biggest decrease worldwide. Other security challenges, of course, have shuffled forward to take the place of the Boko Haram threat. This does not mean that these challenges are newly emergent. What is new is our approach and our determination to contain these threats and protect the lives and property of all Nigerians. This determination can mostly be seen in the way that our security forces in particular have dealt with Boko Haram and several of the threats in parts of the country. Over the last 3 years, some of Nigeria's deadliest criminal kingpins have been arrested or killed. I think credit must go to the security agencies for this. Khalid al-Banawi, head of the Al-Qaeda-linked Ansaru terror group, and one of the most wanted terrorists in the world, was arrested in Kogi State in April 2016. Kidnapped kingpin Evans was arrested in Lagos. Dracula, as it's called, was arrested in Delta. Vampire was arrested in Imo State last year. And the more recent ones, the cultist group in River State, its head and masterminds were attacked, who attacked on New Year's Day in River State, were killed during a joint operation by the military and the DSS at the end of 2017. We must not and cannot afford to relent on the efforts to bring all of these criminals and more to justice. Since the beginning of the year, following the massacre in Guma and Logo attributed to herdsmen, local governments in Benue, the issue of violence in those local governments and in other local governments by suspected herdsmen has dominated national attention, and rightly so. As Mr. President himself said, and I quote, "I'm a soldier, I've seen death in warfare, but the callous killing of innocent people, especially women and children, is cowardly and despicable in the extreme, and it must be prevented or stopped, and the perpetrators must be punished." End of quote. In his statement in commiseration to the governor of Benue State, Mr. President said, and I quote, "This is one attack too many, and everything must be done to provide security for the people in our rural communities. I've ordered the security agencies to find and capture the perpetrators. They must face justice." End of quote. Anyone who has seen the viciousness of the killings and the wantonness of the damage to property is bound to be stupefied by the horror. I was in Dong village in Adamawa, where herdsmen had attacked the village and killed men. But the vicious killing of Fulanis also in the same local government in Adamawa State is worthy of mention. Let me preface this by saying that every Nigerian is entitled to adequate security from government for their lives and livelihood. Government fails in that responsibility often, but I must say never deliberately. Every killing demeans us as a people. Every killing undermines the authority of the state. This is why the suggestion sometimes that because the president is Fulani, he has ignored the killings by herdsmen is both untrue and unfair. In any event, the herdsmen and farmer clashes resulting in deaths have been with us for at least 2 decades. And I've worked with him for 3 years now, and I do not know of any one issue that has given him more concern or on which he has spent more time with security chiefs as this particular issue. What then is being done about security? The approach of the government has been to deploy mobile police forces to troubled areas, and also both the Army and Air Force. The Nigerian Army formations and units in Benue State, for example, especially the 72 Special Forces Battalion, have consistently maintained forward operating bases at the flash areas covering Guma, Logo, Katsina-Ala, and Agatu local government areas. The operation has the generic name Operation Mesa, but is also nicknamed Operation Zenda in Benue State. The Army has within the last few days scaled up the size and troops and equipment in Agatu, in Guma, in Katsina, and Logo local government areas of Benue State. The Army has also recently deployed troops at Awe and Tunda local government areas of Nasarawa State in order to monitor and block the gaps that were presumed to be areas used as staging points by armed herdsmen to attack communities in Benue State. Additionally, troops of the 93 Battalion, Takum in Taraba State, also occupy blocking positions, as well as maintain constant liaison with troops in Benue State. Furthermore, the command and control structure of the Army formations and units in Benue and contiguous states have been recognized. Accordingly, more troops were deployed, and the Commander 707 Special Forces Brigade was reassigned to Taraba State for effective command and control of troops operating in the entire Benue-Taraba general area. And next week, the Nigerian Army, as has been announced, will flag off exercise I Am Aquatuma to checkmate the activities of armed bandits and militias in Benue, in Taraba, in Nasarawa, and environs. Although generally the security forces have performed creditably, and when I say security forces, I refer to the entire infrastructure, given their resource constraints. The problem is that in some of the worst killings, security agents were simply not there in time. Whenever that happens, as was the case in Logo and Guma and in Mambila last year, the failure to protect the lives of the innocent is inexcusable, and we cannot rationalize or diminish that failure of our security apparatus or government in any way. One direct consequence of scaling up of military and police presence in these parts of the country, especially those most vulnerable to attacks by armed herdsmen and other such attacks, is the arrest and detention of hundreds of suspects. And it's in this vein that we will require not only the full and complete investigation of these cases, but also the cooperation of the judiciary to enable the speedy dispensation of justice, so that those who have committed these heinous offenses are brought to book and are seen to have been brought to book. One thread running through all the security challenges in Nigeria, and this is perhaps important to mention, is the proliferation of light arms and small weapons. This age-old problem appears to have intensified in recent years on account of the fall of Muammar Gaddafi and the collapse of Libya in 2011. These events unleashed large numbers of well-trained fighters, as well as the contents of Gaddafi's armories. Today, all across West Africa, security and intelligence agencies are seeing the devastating impact of these mercenaries and their arms and ammunition. Complicating our situation in Nigeria is the porous nature of our more than 4,000 kilometers of borders, which allows the easy flow of illegal weapons. To combat this, we are devoting increased resources to our customs and immigration agencies as well as upgrading the Presidential Committee on Small Arms and Light Weapons into a well-resourced commission, able to account for all of the movement of arms that's going back and forth through our borders. Another issue worth taking into account is the ECOWAS Transhumance Protocol, which Nigeria signed in 1998. This guarantees the free movement of pastoralists or herders across the sub-region. As signatories to that protocol, we are obliged not to restrict the movement of pastoralists and their cattle coming from other ECOWAS countries. Of course, this has added a further complication to the problems we already have. Besides, many of the foreign herders are exposed to the firearms market noted earlier, and are unknown to the local farming populace. What we can do and what we are doing and what we must continue to do is to ensure the robust documentation of all entry and exit through our borders. And as we develop new methods of cattle breeding, we must be able to get those who are coming from other countries to comply with the laws of Nigeria. Because we know that the security situation is only one dimension of a multifaceted issue, we're also working with the state governments and local communities. In January, the Ministers of Interior and Agriculture, on behalf of the President, met with the affected state governments and security intelligence agencies to discuss workable solutions. The President and myself have at various times this year held stakeholder meetings to bring all concerned parties to the table and discuss ways of ensuring peace and security. On January 15, the President met with the Benue political, traditional and religious leaders. A week ago, I met with the Bata and Bachama communities in Adamawa State, and earlier held a meeting with all of the groups, with Fulani groups, in particular the Meitia and several other such groups. These meetings and consultations are crucial. Human beings have not yet, to my knowledge, developed another way of reaching understanding aside from dialogue. There can and will be no lasting peace without dialogue, and there can never be too much dialogue regarding a matter that involves the safety of our lives and property and those of the citizens of our nation. We're also mindful of the peace-building efforts of some state governments. In Plateau, for example, the government constituted a Peace and Reconciliation Committee to work with the Berom and Fulani communities, which had been at loggerheads for years. The government also went ahead to establish the State Peace-Building Agency, the first of its kind by any state government in Nigeria. Since its creation in 2016, the agency has fulfilled its mandate of resolving conflicts and tackling the underlying causes and triggers. The results have been encouraging. The state, once a hotbed of ethnic and communal violence in that region, has enjoyed a great deal of peace in the last 2 years. While some tensions continue to flare up every now and then, there has been none of the high intensity which we have seen in several other states. In neighboring Kaduna State, there has also been efforts to ensure lasting peace. In September 2017, the state government inaugurated a peace commission under the chairmanship of the Most Reverend Josiah Farrow, Secretary General of the Worldwide Anglican Communion and founder of the Kaduna Center for the Study of Christian-Muslim Relations. The federal government fully endorses these peace-building efforts and will continue to give our support and assistance to the state governments in this regard. We're also, with the collaboration of the states and just before that, with the governors of Benue, the governors of Plateau, and the governors of Adamawa State, along with 7 other governors, have constituted a working group, which I chair, where they have been seeking to prefer solutions to some of the problems associated especially with farmer herdsmen clashes, but in particular, how to ensure that there is a plan for cattle breeding and cattle rearing, which will take into account contemporary methods of doing so in other parts of the world. Also, in collaboration with the states and other stakeholders, We've been developing solutions in particular to the issue of resource scarcity, which all of us know is at the heart of conflict. The increasing competition for grazing land and water, which has of course been heightened by climate change. All stakeholders agree that we must now develop new ideas to prevent clashes between herdsmen and farmers. In particular, enabling the cows and herders to become sedentary. It is obvious that the movement of cattle, especially physically, in an endless journey on the move, must now begin to take a different shape. We cannot afford, especially even from the economic perspective, to continue to have that situation. There must be other ways. Now this, we believe that where cattle is sedentary, it will improve the productivity of cattle. Our beef cattle, Sokoto Gudani, adds 0.5 kg per day, while the Brahma in Brazil, which is bred in a ranch, adds 2.5 kilograms per day. Our dairy cows produce 1 liter per day, whereas in other parts of Africa, there's a production of almost 15 to 20 liters per day. So there's also a clear sense, and I think that this must be appreciated, that the federal government cannot dictate to states what to do with their land. This is so because the Land Use Act 1978 puts land under the control of governors on behalf of their states. Also, the Supreme Court, in the case of Attorney General of Lagos versus Attorney General of the Federation in 2004, held that the use of land resources of every type, and permits for such use lie firmly in the hands of state governments. Even for the use of federal lands in the states, according to the Supreme Court, building or development control permits must be sought from the governors of the states. However, in several states, especially in the north, there are duly gazetted grazing reserves. The majority of these grazing reserves are degraded and have been without pasture or water, especially in the dry season. Grazing routes leading to these reserves must also be secured. The grazing reserves, to be effective and to operate effectively, should operate as ranches or livestock production centers on a commercial basis. The ranches will have adequate water from boreholes, salt points, and pasture. The locations will serve both as forage points, but also centers for providing extension services to boost animal care, feeding and veterinary facilities, and even abattoirs. Because the ranches are commercial ventures, cattle owners, of course, will pay for the use of such places. It's important for us to bear in mind that, by and large, in consultations with all of the stakeholders, including pastoralists, all agree that where adequate provision is made on a commercial basis, and no one has suggested that this should be free, on a commercial basis, there is no reason why there will not be cooperation to use those ranches, because they are both an economic benefit and also a social benefit for everyone, including the herders. Aside from states that have gazetted grazing areas, so far, about 13 states have agreed to allocate 5,000 hectares of land for ranching or livestock production. But we must emphasize that in arriving at any of these decisions in the states, the federal government, all of the stakeholders have to sit together and work out solutions that will benefit everyone. This cannot be done by fear or by force. People have to simply work together to ensure that there is adequate consultation and that everyone is taken on board. Let me reiterate that on no account will any lands be seized or forcibly taken to create any of the ranches or grazing areas. All insinuations to that effect should be disregarded. No one is giving land to anyone, as has been falsely alleged in some quarters. Instead, it is our view that states that are willing and which have set aside land, or those that have gazetted grazing areas, should cooperate even with willing investors into commercially viable government-supported ranches or livestock production centers for commercial use. Let me close by summarizing very quickly some policy objectives that we need further work on some of which will benefit from legislative cooperation and, of course, from the cooperation of the judiciary. The first is that the nature of our security challenges are complex and nuanced. That securing Nigeria's over 900,000 square kilometers and its 180 million people requires far more men and materials than we have at the moment. And it also requires a continual re-engineering of our security architecture and strategies. This has to be a dynamic process. For a country our size to meet the 1 policeman to 400 persons, the UN prescribed ratio, would require nearly triple our current police force. Far more funding of the police, far more funding of the military and security agencies is required. Third, we cannot realistically police a country the size of Nigeria centrally from Abuja. State police and other community policing methods are clearly the way to go. Four, that we must intensify existing collaboration with our neighbors in the Chad Basin, especially border communities, to prevent the movement of small arms and in disarming armed pastoralists and bandits who go through our borders day after day. And lastly, that we must avoid the danger of allowing this conflict to harden into religious or ethnic conflict. This is the responsibility of political, religious, and all other parts of our leadership elite in Nigeria. Thank you very much for your kind attention. It is now my very special privilege to declare this very important summit open. Thank you very much.